What houses can I buy for under 500k? Well, New Zealand house prices are expensive. Bloomberg even called it the bubbliest housing market in the world. And today, house prices are 7 times the average household income. So when you see that the median house costs 960k in Auckland and 765k across the whole country, you might think it's going to be impossible to buy my first home or my next investment property. And I'm here to tell you, it's not. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ed, an economist and property investor here at Opus Partners. And in my book, Wealth Plan, I talk about how when you see those headlines about the median house prices, that can sometimes scare you off. And it might even make you think, well, I can't get a property for less than $1 million in Auckland. Well, what if I told you that even though, yes, the median house does cost 960k in Auckland, more properties actually sell for around the 760k mark, 200 grand cheaper, yes, even in Auckland. And the reason for this is that the distribution is skewed. So the most popular house price band is actually 800 to 900k, even though the median house actually costs more than this. And that's because across the country, there are a lot of really expensive houses, and that pulls the median price up. And when that happens, you might not realize that when you're reading these headlines, in actual fact, almost 15% of properties in Auckland sell for less than 700k, and for the rest of New Zealand, around 15% of properties sell for less than 500k. And if you're a first home buyer or an investor, you're not targeting the median or average house. You're probably looking for something a little bit more on the affordable side. So hopefully this data makes you feel a little bit better about your chances of actually getting something on that more affordable side, because there are a lot of properties that sell below that median house price. And I know what you're probably thinking, well, what sort of properties are we talking about? Are they all tin sheds with an outhouse? So I went and analysed over 1,400 properties that sold in Auckland for less than 500k over the last couple of months. And I found that this property recently sold for 490k in Auckland. It's a 3-bed, 1-bath property on a pretty small section, and you can bet, yep, it's tired, it's a bit dated, but it's a house that sold in Auckland for less than 500k. And if you look at this one, it's a 2-bed apartment. It's definitely on the smaller side, all really squished in. But then again, that's probably why it's just sold for $245,000. Now, I probably wouldn't choose to live in this apartment today. But when I was 20, I had less money, and I actually lived in an apartment similar to this, in actually the same building, but it was smaller than this apartment that I've just showed you. And I chose to live there because it was cheap and it was what I could afford at the time, and I actually thought it was really great. So if you've got more money, yes, you'll likely buy something bigger, you'll buy something nicer. But if you've got a really limited budget, you might not realize that there are properties selling like this for less than 300k in Auckland, and it might be something that interests you. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you'll know that I suggest that investors consider buying a new build, because that's what we help people invest in here at Opus Partners. But you won't get much of a new build for less than 500k. But despite that, you can still buy something on the cheaper side. Some investors my team just worked with recently bought this 2-bedroom townhouse in Auckland for 615k. That's $345,000 less than the median sale price across the whole region in Auckland. Or what about this 3-bedroom property out west for 750k, which is again $210,000 less than the median sale price for the whole region. But before you go out and buy these sorts of properties, just keep in mind that cheap isn't always good. So how do you tell which properties are a good deal and which ones are just cheap and nasty? Well, before we get into that, if you'd like to see more of these, what can I buy for less than 500k type videos, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. That's how I know if these are the types of videos you actually want to see more of. And honestly, it really just helps out the YouTube algorithm. Subscribing, that helps too. We are so close to hitting our goal of growing this channel to 20,000 subscribers. And while you're down there doing that, I can actually already hear some of you typing that just because a property is cheap, it doesn't mean it's good, because a quality property is more important than a cheap property. And that's a really good point. That's one of the reasons I wanted to show you a few newer properties that are up to today's building code, but it's actually a little bit over 500K. But I think you bring up a really good point. So how do we figure out whether a more affordable property is good or if it is just cheap and nasty? Well, I mentioned before that I analysed over 1,400 properties that sold recently in Auckland for less than 500K. And I was looking for warning signs that might suggest that they're not a good property, at least when it comes to investment. Now, of course, sometimes cheap properties are leasehold. That means that you buy the house, but someone else owns the land underneath that property. So you've still got to pay them ground rent. And that leads to a whole lot of problems, from the properties not going up in value as fast and making the properties harder to sell. Well, 12% of those under 500K properties were leasehold. On top of that, whether you're an investor or a first home buyer, you're probably thinking about how fast your property is going to go up in value. And we know from our research on this channel that apartments don't go up in value as much as houses and townhouses. And 70% of those properties in Auckland that sold for less than 500K, they were apartments. For instance, the apartment I just showed you before, it first sold for $214,000 back in 2005. 9 years later, 2014, it sold for $181K. So even though the property owner owned that property and held it for 9 years, the value of the apartment went down by $33,000, even as properties in the whole of the Auckland region went up in value by 62% over that same time frame. And as you know, it recently sold for $245,000. That's a 35% gain. But over the same time period, Auckland property prices as a whole gained another 68%. So if you buy an apartment like this, it's not likely that it's going to go up in value substantially over the next 5, 10, or even 15 years. And even if we compare that to that cheaper 3-bedroom property that sold recently for $490K, the funny thing actually is that it also sold in 2005, the same year as the apartment was first sold. But back then, this cheaper property sold for $165K. So between 2005 and today, this property went up in value by $325K, whereas over the same period, the apartment only grew in value by $31,000. That is 10 times less house price growth. So sometimes affordable properties can be really good investments, and sometimes they can be really bad investments. And that is the exact reason why I recently released Opus Plus. It's an app that you can use to analyze your investment properties for free. That includes the cash flow and the potential increase in value for those properties. And when you add all these properties into Opus Plus, you can see that in this specific case, the newer property actually comes out on top as a better investment. That's once all the costs and the returns are considered. And if you want to use this for free, you can head to opuspartners.co.nz, click the login button and create your free account. I'll put the link down in the description. But ultimately, this video isn't about whether to buy a new property or an older one. It's to let you know that even though we always hear that the median house in Auckland costs $960K and across all of New Zealand it's over $700,000, I'm here to remind you that the distribution is skewed and there are a lot of good quality properties available for less than the averages you often hear quoted in the media.